The world of video games is a pretty interesting place. You got your all-time greats, your games that are kind of average but are still fun, and then you got your real stinkers. And I'm going to list 100 of the worst video games that exist. This list isn't going to be ranked in any specific order because it's pretty tough to make a definitive list of the worst video games of all time, especially on your own. So don't take this as a definitive list because I'm probably going to miss a lot of games that people find completely terrible. A lot of these picks are going to be from personal experiences, so expect a heavy bias. The only rule I have for this list is that bootlegs won't be a part of it because they're bootlegs. And a lot of Steam indie trash games that are worth like 50 cents because a lot of them are pretty shitty, so this whole list would probably be filled with half of my Steam library if that was the case. Unless they're notable, I'm not going to be putting them on the list. There's also going to be a multi-parter series because I'm busy with shit, so expect a lot of delay, I guess. So let's get started with the bottom 100 worst video games of all time. Yay! Also, just to clarify that most of these aren't going to be super in-depth reviews because I would be here forever doing that. These are probably going to be quick, like 1-minute reviews, so. So I kind of wrote these games down from whatever was on my mind, so if the order seems weird, then that's the reason. Anyways, Mindjack seemed like it would be a somewhat interesting game with its main gimmick called Mindjacking, where you can take control of an enemy and use them to fight. In action though, it really doesn't add much unless it's a special kind of enemy. Besides that, the gameplay itself is a generic third-person shooter. On initial release, this game was very buggy with frequent crashes, making it very annoying to play. It's been heavily patched, but a lot of the problems still exist, like really stupid AI, a dumb plot with dumb characters, graphics that belong in the PS2, the inability to pause during gameplay, shitty bosses, etc. Even the cover system is bad because 50% of the time, most of my bullets would hit the cover I was behind, even when the crosshair was fully away from it. While it may not be the worst thing I've played, it still isn't worth your time. Thanks, Square Enix. Can't wait to see you again later down the list. Wild Woody is pretty infamous nowadays for its awful, albeit humorous cutscenes. If the cutscenes were the only bad thing about the game, then it wouldn't be here. The major issue with the game are the level structure and controls. The level design kind of reminds me of the first Earthworm Jim, except more maze-like and harder to navigate. You need to teleport through boxes and avoid the hundreds of things trying to kill you. What doesn't help are the awful controls. Woody has a horrible jump which feels like it lags during it. Enemies are hard to kill because your main method of attacking is jumping on enemies and erasing them with Woody's butt. The hit detection is really bad, even worse when you're in a pain state. Woody does have a sketch mechanic where he'll draw something to help take out enemies, and it works pretty well. It's better than Mindjack's main gimmick at least, but it's not enough to really save the gameplay. If I can say one positive about the game, is that the soundtrack is actually pretty decent. I know it seems kind of corny, but I think that's just what makes it awesome. Oh good, another Square Enix game. The Quiet Man fucking sucks. The main gimmick with this game is that the whole game has no audio with the exception of vibration. This is because the main character of the game, Dane, is deaf. I guess they wanted to simulate how it feels to be a deaf person, but in the context of this game it just doesn't work. For one, there are no subtitles or even any visual clues during the cutscenes on what is going on in the story. These cutscenes are also very long too, like some of them can reach up to 6 minutes. The silence also doesn't help because Dane understands what all the other characters are saying, but we don't, so what's the point of removing the audio? I didn't even mention the gameplay yet, which is just a generic beat 'em up where you kill the same 2 enemies over and over and over again for 2 hours. It sucks. They even patched in a sound version a week after the game was released explaining everything. It's fucking stupid. If you want to read about it, go ahead. But I'm not going to waste your time with this dumbass story. Slender clones were pretty common back in the early 2010s. A lot of them were pretty bad, but at least they were usually free to play on like a browser or something. The Letter is not one of those games. Released on the Wii U for $3, The Letter has you play as Michael, who is trying to find his father who disappeared for some reason. If you've played Slender, this game acts the same, where you walk around a big map to find 6 objects. Unlike Slender though, there's no threat. No monster chases you no matter how many items you find, so you're left walking around in the dark finding stupid crap. So what's the point of this game, you might ask? I'll tell you, absolutely fucking nothing. You wasted $3. Thank you. Goodbye. Probably not gonna make friends with this one. Shadow the Hedgehog. At first it seems like it might be kind of fun because what other Sonic game has one of the characters shooting realistic guns? None of them. The major problem with the game though is the overall design. The branching path seems like it could have worked, but the missions you need to complete to go down said paths are repetitive and tedious. The alternate paths don't even matter because the last story mode retcons all 10 endings. All the levels are confusing to navigate because there is no map or compass pointing you towards your objective. It also doesn't help that the levels are huge and bleak with no outstanding landmarks. Just take a look at Lost Impact. That level fucking sucks ass. Finding all the perfect chaos in that level is awful. It can take over an hour the first time playing. The controls are really slippery and don't work for the overall design of this game. This game just outright sucks, and I really don't, I can't understand how people can enjoy this game. I really can't. I'm sorry. There's a lot of Wii shovelware out there, but none are as well known as Ninja Bread Man. Our lovely friends at Data Design gave us a platformer from the PS2 with hand-fisted motion controls that don't work in the slightest. You have to shake the nunchuck to jump, which works as well as you think it does. The game itself is simple and really short, taking less than an hour to beat because it only has 4 levels counting the tutorial. And I can't forget about the other 3 platformers Data Design made: Rock'n'Roll Adventures, Trixie in Toyland, and Anubis II. They're all the same exact game with just different graphics. Seriously, the same enemies and objectives. Only on the Wii you could get away with making the same stupid ass game 4 times. They could have just combined it into one game. But nope, gotta maximize your profits somehow. Fuck you, Data Design. I'm glad you're gone. Long development can really hurt a game. We'll see a few more down the line, but let's start with Daikatana. Daikatana is infamous for its shaky development, going through several different changes. In the end, the game we got isn't complete trash, but it's not that much fun either. Weapons all have their own quirk to them, making them very awkward to use. You have limited saves on each level, making each level a chore to go through, and they're not small levels either. Your partner AI is dumb as rocks, and they constantly get stuck on terrain or get shot constantly, and you need these guys to follow you to actually finish the stage. Daikatana in its original state is unbearable to play. If you do want to check it out, I recommend you download the newest patch for the game, which fixes the majority of the issues. You can actually remove the AI completely, making the game way easier to go through. Even if you do bring them in, they have infinite health and ammo, but they still get stuck constantly, so just remove them. Another game with a large amount of hype behind it, Two Worlds was slated to be the next open-world fantasy RPG on the same level as Oblivion. Too bad it was all a lie. The game is plagued with bad graphics, dumb AI, quests that mainly consist of walking back and forth to different spots, and the beyond atrocious voice acting.
You are the mercenary of whom I have heard. Welcome.
This sounds as if you're in need of my modest talents.
Indeed. I have a small problem and I want someone whom I can trust.
How do you know you can trust me?
Ferret Redissimus, a friend of mine, told me that you are trustworthy. Now to business.
Two Worlds was so bad, in fact, the developers sent out apology notes to retailers stating that they were sorry that the game sucked complete ass. They at least made up for it with a sequel which also isn't great, but it's way better than this hunk of crap. Bad Day LA is an odd one for me. Created by American McGee, who also created the Alice games, Bad Day LA is a very weird Postal clone with political satire thrown into the mix. On the surface, it doesn't sound like the worst thing ever, but in execution it really fucked up. A lot of the satirical humor doesn't really work because of the horrible timing for each joke, mixed with the really poor voice acting and annoying characters. It's almost as bad as Two Worlds voice acting. Even if it was well acted, the jokes themselves are not really well written and are more offensive than funny. The gameplay is jank and tedious with very little in terms of variety. The graphics are okay-ish, I kind of like what they were going for, but it really didn't work out. This game had the potential to be pretty good, but oh well. Operation Matriarchy is one of the strangest plots I've experienced in a game. There's a virus floating around that only targets female life, turning them into human killing machines, while the male populace all become enslaved, being used for food, or being turned into weird mutants. You awake from hypersleep when your ship is under attack by these creatures. It doesn't sound too bad, and the game doesn't really look that awful to play. But the problems start to fly in real fast. The AI is so awful because they all just bum rush you down. There are very little sound effects with the exception of gunfire and grunts, and there's no music. The level design is okay for the most part, but is sadly brought down to the copious amount of enemies they shove into each room, and the gameplay really doesn't shake up much. It's a real shame. This game probably could have been good. I don't know what it was to create games based around the Bible, but there are a bunch of them. Catechumen is probably one of the better ones, but it still isn't amazing. What really brings the game down is the insane difficulty. The AI moves so awkwardly and fast that hitting them is tough to do, not to mention that they can deal an insane amount of damage, even on the easy skill. The level design isn't anything special and it can become way too dark in some areas, making enemies almost impossible to see. There's a good variety of weapons, but most of them don't work well with the fast-paced gameplay. A lot of them are projectile-based instead of hit-scan-based, which really doesn't work. I do have a review on this game. It's one of the first ever video game reviews I've done. It's not a great review because, it was the first one I did, but if you're curious, check it out. They don't shove a bunch of Bible shit down your throat for most of the game, so it isn't too bad. Oh good, it's this game again. Drake of the 99 Dragons is awful in every sense of the word. I did a whole 20-minute review on this game showcasing how bad it is. But to summarize, the game suffers from bad controls, awful camera, dumb plot, broken mechanics, bad voice acting, long load times, and crappy graphics. To think that the developers wanted this game to launch a whole series complete with sequels, comics, and even a TV show. If they really wanted that to become reality, they should have put more effort into this train wreck of a game. How come when developers want to make a video game bigger than it was, they put no effort into it? Why does that happen? That happens all the time. Stupid. Rascal had the Rascal had the potential to be a decent game. Looking at it from this clip, it has really good graphics and has what feels like 60 FPS on the PS1. I'm not sure if it's 60 FPS, it could be like 48, but that's still pretty impressive. However, some executive thought it would be a good idea to change the controls late into development. See, this game was originally going to have controls and a camera similar to Mario 64. Last minute changes swapped them to tank controls instead. And this game just does not work with these controls, especially since now the camera is all screwed up because of it. Besides the controls, if you don't have the manual, you'll have no idea what is going on and what you're supposed to be doing during the gameplay, because there's literally no dialogue or anything to read. It's a real shame. This game could have been an underrated gem. Too bad. Mario is missing, and Mario's Time Machine. I lumped these two together because they're both similar games. Both of these titles sound pretty neat, but it's all a facade. Mario's Time Machine sounds like an epic platformer where you go through different parts throughout time and fight bad guys, while Mario's Missing can be an epic quest where you save Mario. It is the first game to star Luigi too, which is interesting. Unfortunately, what you'll find instead are edutainment games. Games that are meant to teach you about historical stuff. While I think both games do a decent job at teaching you things, what's the point? I play video games to avoid learning. They could have made the gameplay itself fun at least. Especially in the case of Mario is Missing, where you just walk back and forth constantly and occasionally kill a Koopa and then talk to somebody. It's not interesting. I can't imagine how many kids were disappointed when they got this thinking it was something better. Sorry, little Timmy, you gotta learn for Christmas. Hey guys, do me a favor and never play Leisure Suit Larry Box Office Bus. This game is truly one of the most bland and obnoxious games I've sat through. Unlike other Larry games, where they were adventure games with witty humor, Box Office Bus is a platformer with humor only middle schoolers would find funny. I don't know whose idea it was to turn this game into a platformer, but they need to be fired. The gameplay is super dull and not very challenging. The main draw, I assume, would have to be the dialogue. give them some credit at least. They got a lot of big name actors to voice in this game, such as Josh Keaton and Patrick Warburton. While they do a good job reading the script itself is bad. Most of the humor comes from just the characters swearing constantly, or bad sex jokes. I think the only time I laughed was at an out-of-place fart joke. A fart joke. Yeah, that's how dull this whole experience was. One singular fart was funny. Oh, and if you're expecting any sex scenes, they're not in the game either. Sorry. Expecting a game that was in development for 15 years to be good is pretty much unreasonable. Duke Nukem Forever sadly falls into development hell, and the end product isn't the worst thing ever, but it isn't anything worth playing, similar to Daikatana. Rather than having big levels, finding keys, and a large battalion of weapons, it's your generic brown and black cover-based shooter. You can only have a max of 4 weapons on you at all times. This was patched in later, however, only on the PC. I did enjoy some locales, like the Duke Burger and the Ghost Town, but everything else was a slog to play through. The story is stupid and all the characters are either obnoxious, Dylan, or completely stupid. Now, console ports are even worse with texture pop-in, long load time, screen tearing, you name it. Thank you, Randy, for fucking up another beloved franchise. I'd still rather play this than Aliens Colonial Marines. Oh, yeah, I'll get to that one soon enough. God, that one's awful.
Hello, I'm Captain Novolin, and I have diabetes.
We're back with another edutainment game. This time with a game that teaches you about diabetes. Why in the world would somebody make a game about diabetes? It's actually a well-disguised ad for a brand of insulin called Novolin. But how about the game? It's boring. Captain Novolin can only jump and walk forward. You need to collect milk and bananas in order to keep your blood sugar low while avoiding bouncing donuts and walking snacks. Sounds exciting, I know. The graphics, music, everything about this game is a disgrace. Did I mention the whole point of this game is to give insulin to the mayor of the town before he dies? No? Well, that's it. I feel bad for the kids who had diabetes themselves and were forced to play this game. That would suck. If you wanted to play a rhythm game with no rhythm, then just play VIP. Based on the show of the same name, VIP has you take control of some of the characters in the show, most notably Pamela Anderson, known for her huge personality. The whole game is just pressing the right buttons in order for whatever pops up on the screen. There's also some shooting segments, but it's just moving the crosshair over the guy and then pressing the button. The graphics are pretty bad, and the music is grating after a while. You're better off watching the show it's based on. It's probably not half bad. Maybe, I don't know. I've never seen the show, but the game sucks. When beloved series go through a reboot phase, most of the time they end up sucking ass. Bomberman Act Zero was one reboot that sucked major ass. Firstly, all of the cool characters from the previous games are all gone and replaced with these edgy robots with no personality to them at all. The gameplay is a bare bones Bomberman with only slightly new features, that being the first person mode, which is more of a third person mode and you can't even see most of the board, so there's no point and it doesn't add much besides that. The single player mode is tedious, as it's essentially the same level over and over again for 100 levels. If you die, game over, no saving or anything. The AI is fucking annoying because they're either dumb as dirt or avoid all of your bombs. It's frustrating. The multiplayer is non-existent because they removed local co-op play and you're stuck with just online players. Like you're going to find anyone nowadays to play this crap. Who thought this game was a good idea? What even happened here? Dragon Ball Z Sagas is probably one of the most dull and boring beat-em-ups I've ever played. Most of the game you just spam the same stupid combo over and over again because most of the combos barely make a difference. All of the enemies are the same and just charge you down. Boss fights are tedious and long, and this entire game is extremely buggy, so there will be some instances where bosses like Android 17 fall through the floor. The graphics are ugly and looks on par with Superman 64 in all honesty. You're better off playing Dragon Ball Advance Adventure on the Game Boy. That game is awesome. I have a whole review on Dragon Ball Z Sagas too, so if you want to check that out, go ahead. Okay, before I talk about Balls 3D, you need to hear the title theme for the SNES version.
Oi! 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 Oi!
If I didn't know any better, I would assume this was some weird porno remix. Anyway, Balls 3D plays like the title. Balls. The controls are really bad that pulling off basic combos is hard to do. It's hard to tell what any of the characters are doing because they're all made of balls. The AI is completely unfair because they have no problem kicking in your balls. The sound effects are annoying, constant slowdown, and the background messages on the billboard are just weird. It's not the worst fighting game, but it still sucks. Balls. Video games based on theme parks seem like a great idea. It's pretty expensive to go to a lot of the big named ones like Disney, so creating an experience you can play in the comfort of your home seems novel. Unfortunately, most of the time that doesn't happen. Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure is one of the worst examples of this. Instead of just making a game where you can simulate the many attractions at the park, you run around picking up garbage and putting into trash cans. That's the bulk of the gameplay. No shit. There are rides to go on, but if you don't have enough points, you can't enter them, so you gotta pick up trash to get enough points. The rides themselves are just minigames. Just okay minigames at best. It's not worth your time to grind up a bunch of points just to play these minigames that only last for barely a few minutes. Don't even get me started on navigating through this game with its fixed camera angles and retarded directionless design. Unless you know the park, you'll get lost. Fuck this game. Did you know there was a sequel to Superman 64? It was just under the guise of Aquaman, Battle for Atlantis on the GameCube. The similarities to both of these games is astounding, honestly, especially in the way you traverse levels and pick up stuff. First off, the cutscenes are atrocious. They're just still comic book styled panels with no voice acting or anything like that. The gameplay is dull. Most of the time you just mash one button to beat up the same enemy over and over and over and over and over again. Even though you're in the ocean, there are invisible walls everywhere, so navigation sucks. The graphics are ugly and there's no life at all throughout the place. Aren't I supposed to be in Atlantis? Where is everybody? This game is not even worth 5 minutes of your time. Don't bother. Another bad fighting game. Oh boy. Kabuki Warriors was one of the earlier original Xbox titles, similar to Drake of the 99 Dragons. But just like Drake, it sucks. All you have to do in this game is just mash one button because the AI in this game is awful and can't do shit against it. The character selection is awful because all of them look exactly the same, with the only difference being a slightly different looking face. And why are they all completely white? It's like they dunked themselves in mayo or something. The graphics and the sound are bad, and that's pretty much all there is to say. There's nothing in this game that is good. Maybe you can find it so bad it's good or something like that. I don't know. It sucks. Don't play it. To wrap up this first part, let's talk about Postal 3. I really like Postal 2. It's stupid and broken, but extremely fun. I've heard a lot of shit about Postal 3, and you know what? It's all completely justified because this game is truly a train wreck. I guess for some positives, the graphics aren't too bad, and the soundtrack is actually very good. The gameplay is a mainly linear level-by-level affair with branching paths partway through. The whole morality system this game implements does not work for this series. Making the Postal Dude seem like a nice guy is impossible. This is the Postal Dude we're talking about. Guy who kills people. Going down the good path is hard to do anyway because one slight fuck up ruins it all. Most of the gameplay is just shooting down hordes of whatever enemy the game decides to throw onto you. Hippies, terrorists, eco-terrorists, animals, you get the idea. Most of the weapons are really ineffective, especially all of the melee weapons which do absolutely nothing. The enemy AI isn't very good because most of the time they just walk out into the open and allow themselves to get shot, including teammates if you have them. Again, making the good path part of the story more frustrating to play because if you accidentally kill one of your teammates, the good path is lost forever. The amount of bugs and glitches I ran into were aggravating as well. The physics on some of the objects in the game are insane, and a lot of the time you can be flung straight into the air and get stuck. I actually had to restart the whole damn game because the dude was stuck in the ground when a new level started. Reloading didn't work either, and I couldn't figure out how to turn on no-clip. The game has constant slowdown and frequent crashes to boot. At least Postal 2 was fun, so I didn't mind the crashes. This game really has nothing going for it. Also, my antivirus software treated this as a virus, so if that doesn't turn you away, I don't know what will. This one is sad. Major Minor's Majestic March was created by the same team behind Parappa the Rapper. I like that series, but it kind of faded away after the second game. So a spiritual successor to this series seems like a good idea. The only problem, however, is that this was released early on the Wii, meaning that the team forced in barely functional motion controls. My favorite. This game wants you to be so damn precise moving the Wiimote up and down in rhythm with the game. If you do it properly, it does work, but I'm not a robot, so I'm going to get tired very quickly with the stiff motion you want me to do to actually get through this game. Why would you do this, guys? The graphics have that Parappa feel, which is nice, but the cutscenes are just JPEGs with the voiceover. It's very lazy, especially in comparison to Parappa the Rapper 2's cutscenes with voice acting and real characters. The story in this game is bland that only someone under the age of 3 would enjoy. I really hate motion controls that barely work. They really kill a ton of games. Dude, really? Big Rigs? Would you even classify this as a video game? This game was released in a pre-alpha state, and it certainly looks like it. Nothing in this game is complete. I think the only things that are functional for the most part are the menus and driving forward. This is a racing game where the racing is non-existent. The unpatched version of this game has the opponent driver never move from the starting gate, and when you win, it displays the greatest message of all time: "Your winner indeed." I did say unpatched because they actually released a patch where the opponent actually moves, but you still win regardless because they never programmed what happens when you lose. But that's all they changed about the whole game. The rest of the game is so bleak and your truck is insane. It can pass through buildings and bridges like nothing. It can even go up 90-degree cliffs without losing speed and leave the game entirely. Going in reverse is the best because your top speed is fucking insane when this happened. How fast? I actually looked it up on how fast you actually go in reverse. Apparently the top speed recorded is 12.3 undecillion miles per hour, which is 18.3 octillion times the speed of light. Holy fucking shit. We found something faster than light. This whole game is complete crap, but it's amazing at the same time. The box that this game comes in has more effort than the entirety of this whole game. Alright, I've mentioned it a few times in the first part, so let's just get Superman 64 out of the way. This game is pure agony throughout. I actually played through this whole game on stream, and nothing about it was enjoyable. The story, the gameplay, graphics, controls, the inconsistent frame rate, it's all dog shit. Most people who've only heard about this game thinks the whole game is just flying through rings. It isn't, but they take up 7 of the 14 stages. It's the most tedious shit ever. They do splice in small missions in between each ring race, but if you fail the missions, you need to redo the rings again. If you do fail them 3 times, you actually do start back at the mission, but why the fuck do I have to replay the stupid rings segment when I failed a 2-second mission? I don't know. Knowing how broken everything is in this game, you'll fail the missions a lot. Oh yeah, this game is almost impossible to play without running into bugs or glitches. Flying through the rings is the only thing in the game that works properly. The other 7 levels the game calls maze levels are way worse. You just get dropped into a stage and kinda have to guess on what to do. Have fun restarting these levels all the fucking time, because you'll probably end up falling through the floor or something you need glitches out of existence. Or maybe you'll be insta-killed by the sheer amount of bullshit the game springs onto you, or strict timers for certain tasks. And no, there are no checkpoints in any of the levels. Good thing there's an in-game cheat menu, or else I would have never gotten through this shit. Especially the final level, which took me 2 hours. Fuck everything about this game. You know what, I think this is the first game on this list to be released in the current decade. Balan Wonderworld is one of the biggest flops in recent years. I don't know why I bought this game when it released though. I bought the Switch version, and it's probably the worst one of them all, with really bad graphics in comparison to the other consoles, frame rate which takes a dive in a lot of the levels, and the game sometimes freezes too for like a good 5 seconds. But that's only the start of the bad shit this game has. The gameplay is more reminiscent of an Atari game because you can only move and use a singular button for all of your actions. Literally 6 buttons make your character jump. There are costumes throughout the levels you can collect and use with their own powers. Most of them are completely worthless outside the level you obtain them in, and they aren't any better for taking out enemies. This is nothing like a Kirby power-up if you're asking that. There's a costume where you transform into a box every 10 seconds, which could send you careening off a cliff. There are mini games in each level which are all exactly the same, where you press the A button when Balan is lined up with his silhouette. Much like Rascal, there is no dialogue throughout the game with the exception of the opening movie. But at least in Rascal, the opening gave me a better understanding of the plot. Balan just kidnapped 2 kids for no real reason. You actually have to buy a separate book to understand what's going on with the story. Yeah, right. Balan Wonderworld is one of the worst games ever released. Screw off. Oh, wait, I forgot about the awkward dance sequences too that happen at the end of each world. Oh, those are really bad too. Another game that went through development hell, Ride to Hell Retribution was originally slated to come out in 2008, but some bullshit pushed it back to 2013. This game is more funny bad to me. It's probably the awful writing and really awkward line delivery from the characters that make it really enjoyable. Jake Conway returns from war and meets up with his family, but then his brother dies to a rival biker gang. So Jake avenges his brother by killing everyone he comes across and has dry humping sex with every woman he meets. Fully clothed, I might add. The game is a mixture of third-person shooting and driving. Driving is terrible because it's usually just a straight line with the stiffest turning ever. Shooting your gun properly is hard to do because aiming the cursor always has it slide over the guy you try to shoot. It tries to auto-aim for you, but it just does not work. So you need to move Jake's body in order to get a clean shot. Melee combat is a joke because you can just spam the kick button and the enemies can't do shit against it. Enemies are dumb fucks, because like a bunch of these other games I spoke about, they just charge you down. A single headshot kills every enemy with no problem. Except for those Jason Voorhees guys, those guys just never fucking die. Honestly, check this game out for yourself. It's pretty funny with the weird glitches and story. But I'm not sure if you'll have a fun time playing through the game though. You're better off just watching somebody else play and just laugh at the cutscenes. I've talked about games with long development time. How about one with very little development time? Sonic the Hedgehog, or better known as Sonic 06, was released on the 15th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog, one of the biggest icons in gaming. You would think they would take their time designing this game, making sure it's perfect for Sega's main man. But no, they rushed it out. Sonic 06 is an awful, terrible experience. The controls are awkward. They're way too snappy, making characters really hard to control. The level design is terrible because they built the levels around 5 different characters each instead of like 1 or 2 like in the previous adventure titles. So levels can be awkward to traverse with certain characters. There are 9 characters to play and they all have their own little issues. Sonic's gems have a meter which doesn't drain, making them unlimited and completely broken. He has fucking awful Mach speed sections with unbearable controls. Every time you jump, you cannot steer where you're going, so you better make sure your jumps are lined up properly or you fall down a pit and die. Shadow is slow as crap and has very awful vehicles which tip over constantly because the terrain doesn't support them. Silver just fucking sucks, especially the ball puzzle. Tails is slow as ass, Knuckles and Rouge constantly get stuck on the wall all the damn time, Omega is somehow faster than Sonic, and Blaze, she's okay, but you play her like twice. Oh, and Amy too, but she's actually probably like one of the worst characters to play. Fuck Amy. The glitches are unavoidable and can really mess up your A ranks if you decide to go for them for some reason. The loading times are frequent and long. Boss battles suck because the camera never focuses on them. Silver's boss fight sucks dick. The story has so many plot holes that nothing makes sense in the long run. The realistic graphics look very odd next to the weird cartoony Sonic characters. This whole game just flat out sucks. But the music is awesome. Oh, and this scene is also pretty great too.
Chaos control!
Time for some classic NES trash. Conan is one of the worst examples of a game starting out way too difficult. First of all, the controls are really bad, especially jumping. You can only jump straight up or at a 45-degree angle by pressing down on the D-pad. Why down to jump? You can pick up items by pressing down as well, along with the B button, but if you don't press them correctly, Conan will jump forward and probably into a pit and die. The hit detection is awful because you need to practically be inside of the enemies in order to hit them with melee attacks, so you're better off just using a projectile attack instead. The graphics are lazy and the soundtrack is very forgettable. You need a walkthrough to progress through this game because nothing is obvious. Like, how was I supposed to know I needed to cut down a hanging skeleton with a sword you get from a random enemy from the ceiling to make a devil spawn to get a trident to kill a lion at the end of the level? I don't know. Okay, I wanted to forget about this game entirely, but it resurged when I thought of making this series. Gods and Generals is one of the worst shooters ever made. First, the graphics are complete dog water, looking like a game from the mid-90s rather than the early 2000s. Each level has objectives complete, and once you finish all of them, well, sometimes all of them, because certain levels you can ignore all of the objectives and find the exit and leave. All of the weapons you obtain are useless except for your starting pistol because it holds a ton of ammo and can actually kill things properly. The AI is completely brain dead and will run past you in most instances or gang up in a big pile and shoot you. The AI also loves to only shoot you instead of teammates, so dying is very common and very frustrating, especially on harder difficulties. The game implements an RPG level up system which was completely unnecessary because by the end you'll only upgrade like 5 things, and half of them are completely useless like the stealth, which doesn't do anything. I got a review on this game as well, so if this game piques your interest in some way, you can check out my review, which has more detail, if you wish. Another game I beat on stream, Bubsy 3D, is probably the worst PS1 game I've played. There's might be one out there I forgot, but this one comes to mind as being really bad. It's a platformer with tank controls, much like Rascal. At least with Bubsy, the game was designed around these controls, so it's a little bit better, but it still isn't very good. Bubsy feels so stiff and heavy that walking around and turning are tough to do. Sometimes during a jump, Bubsy will just stop partway through and fall like a leaf. A very, very heavy leaf. The plot makes no sense. Bubsy's main enemies, the Woolies, kidnap him to prevent him from stopping their plans. Yet they bring him to their home planet where he escapes and pretty much kills all of them. Good job. The graphics are just a bunch of textureless polygons which are more at home on the Atari Jaguar than the PS1. The levels are confusing to navigate and boring to play. You just jump on the same gray, pink, and blue square platforms, collecting atoms and rocket pieces. The rocket pieces are for 100% completion, but they don't matter because all you get is a shittier ending. Enemies like to spawn randomly out of the side of the screen and attack you. It happens so damn fast that you're guaranteed to get hurt and potentially die. The boss fights are really bad because you kinda have to guess on how to beat them. And with these controls, it's harder than it needs to be. Like, how is I supposed to know I'm supposed to glide on the gun residue of the boss? I'm still surprised Bubsy got reincarnated in 2014 with a new game. Why can't we just let dumb shit like this die? The only positive I can say about this game are the death animations and AFK animations. They're pretty good. Yeah, the best parts of the game are not playing it and dying. Enjoy your dumb Gold X award, you stupid orange cat. Somehow, there's an FPS out there worse than Gods and Generals. Country Justice Revenge of the Rednecks is one of the worst things I've ever played. I know I've said some things are the worst things I've ever played, but this time, it's really bad. It's on the level of incomplete garbage like Big Rigs, but with slightly more features. This game is a strange ripoff of Redneck Rampage, which in itself isn't a great game, but it's at least competent. The game has horrible graphics, voice acting, controls, plot, gameplay. Everything you think would be bad is bad. The load times are so insanely long that you could probably watch the entirety of The Batman and it still wouldn't have loaded. The enemies and gunplay are all broken, and none of the guns fire off properly, and your melee weapon doesn't do shit. The game is horribly glitchy and buggy that you can essentially clip through certain walls and skip most parts of the game. Your truck is one of the worst vehicles ever conceived in a video game, and it gets stuck on the stupidest shit all the damn time. The ending of the game is completely screwed up, because if you don't beat the boss in a specific way, the game will lock up and you can't reach the ending. Also, there's nothing to do in this game after you beat it. The map they created is gigantic. I think they said it was bigger than San Andreas, but except for the places you have to go to, there is jack shit to explore, except for hundreds of zombies and cows, and that's it. I want my $7 back. Why did Valve approve of this game? Hunt Down the Freeman, I believe, was going to be a fan-made movie that takes place between the first and second Half-Life games, but in the end it was turned into a video game, and we all want our money back from this hunk of crap. Hunt Down the Freeman is a broken mess. Even with patches, the game is still completely broken and a pain to navigate. There were so many instances I had to use no-clip or God mode just to get through some parts because it was never clear on where to go, or in the case of New Alaska, undodgeable snipers and insta-kill snow. Certain enemies, like the Combine soldiers, have giant red error text in place of their gun. The levels have no direction, so you're left wandering around until something happens. The gunplay is not the same as in Half-Life because unlike Gordon Freeman, Mitchell is slow as shit and plays more like a modern FPS protagonist, unlike a faster old-school Gordon. The enemies are all reused from the Half-Life games, which are built around Gordon's faster movement and not Mitchell's sluggish movement. The plot is really dumb and rips off MGS5 of all things. The protagonist, Mitchell, is the most unlikable and edgy sack of crap with a really dumb motivation. See, the whole point of Mitchell's quest is to, as the title implies, hunt down Gordon Freeman, because in the words of Mitchell,
You fucked up my face.
yeah, it's pretty stupid. The voice acting is all poorly done, but somehow they got a bunch of YouTubers to voice these characters like I Hate Everything, Pyrocynical, and even fucking Keemstar as the president. Hunt Down the Freeman is a big meme and should be removed off the Steam store. I don't know why it hasn't been removed yet. Making Where's Waldo into a video game isn't a bad idea, unless you're Bethesda and decide it would work on the NES. I don't even need to explain why this doesn't work. Where's Waldo, a highly detailed picture book where you need to find Waldo, put into an 8-bit NES cartridge, yeah, you can see where the problem lies. You can't even tell who Waldo is supposed to be in most of these screens. Just click on the screen a bunch until you accidentally find him. The game also has other little activities like a pipe puzzle and a slot machine, which are as fun as you think they are. Imagine playing this game back when it released on a CRT TV. You would never find Waldo. This game also takes less than half an hour to beat on the easy skill. What a joke. Open world early access survival games are in no shortage on Steam, but what if one of those games didn't have that early access tag and was released as a full game? Day 1, Gary's Incident is what you think it is. A very early in development survival game that was shat onto Steam as a full release. It's a very lackluster game with several bugs, poor graphics, frame rate on par with N64 games, AI that doesn't give a shit if you attack them or not, really oddly implemented QuickTime events and insta-kill events. Cool, my favorite. The developers actually tried to hide online criticism and probably paid a bunch of people to give this stupid crap 10 out of 10s. Instead of spending time actually fixing the game, they decided to be big babies about it and ruin their reputation even more. It's been a long time since I played this game. According to Steam, I last played it on September 2nd, 2015. And you know what? I plan to keep it that way. Fuck this game. This one is really upsetting. I love the original Spyro trilogy on the PS1. I played them all the time and would always 100% them. The next installment in the series, Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, was a huge disappointment. First off, there are only 9 levels in the game, compared to the previous games which had around 20 to 30 levels. They're big levels, sure, but they aren't fun to go through because a majority of them are poorly designed. The controls feel a lot floatier than in previous games, and the frame rate is always floating around 25 frames per second, even on emulators. The game has so many glitches that you can beat the game in less than 5 minutes. The game introduces new abilities, but some like the Wing Shield you only really need to use for one level. The Bubble Breath is only for catching the main collectible, Dragonflies, and the hit detection on it is complete crap. While the game doesn't look completely awful, the character models are all shiny and stretchy and look worse than the PS1 models. Also, somehow Ripto is the villain of this game, even though at the end of the second game he drowned and burned to death in lava. I don't know how that works. I don't know how he's still alive. I can go on about other stupid crap like the long loading times on the PS2 or the really terrible minigames, but I'd be here forever. At least Spyro: A Hero's Tale was an improvement over this rush piece of garbage. Somebody out there thought this was a good idea to sell to the public. Custer's Revenge is a game where you play as the real-life General George Armstrong Custer, completely naked with a large boner, walking to the right, dodging arrows so you can reach a completely naked Native American and rape her. That's the whole game. It's repetitive, and of course it was extremely controversial when it released. There's not much else to say about this game. It's a waste of everything that it could stand for. Why in the fuck would you make a game like this? What do you get if you create a game in 2 weeks? You get Extreme Paintbrawl. Rushed and horribly buggy, Extreme Paintbrawl was outdated as soon as it hit shelves. By this time, Quake was already out and this game used the build engine which hosted games like Duke Nukem 3D. The guns are pretty accurate to real life, meaning you can't hit shit with them unless you're in their face, but the opponents have no problem hitting you. The game is so lagging and the controls are very sluggish. The game crashes all the time and wouldn't even work on newer PCs at the time. The only single player is against bots on weirdly designed maps that don't represent actual paintball fields. And the soundtrack is just bizarre, and it doesn't fit the game at all. Avoid this one and play real paintball instead. It's probably more fun too. On par with Superman 64, Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue is another cheap superhero game. For this entry, I'm specifically talking about the N64 version because the PS1 version is actually different and plays more like an actual video game. The cutscenes in this game are so fucking bad. It looks like they were drawn by a child and have the worst, most compressed music I've heard. The game has only a handful of different levels that get looped over and over again. Top-down levels where you shoot energy balls out your ass with just the A and B buttons, truck levels where you rescue civilians by moving up and down, and Megazord battles, which is probably the coolest part, but it plays like complete trash, so it sucks. The graphics and animations are all poorly done, the AI runs at you very slowly and do like no damage, the sound effects are annoying, with my favorite being, "Hooray! Alright, help me!" And this game can be beaten in like an hour. The only thing I liked about this game is the cool black cartridge it comes in. just play the PS1 version instead. Now this is a classic shit game. E.T. on the Atari is infamous for being one of the many causes of the video game crash of 1983. Developed in a fourth of the time compared to standard Atari games, which is like 4 months each game, this game has you control E.T. as he tries to phone his way home by collecting parts of a phone and then leaving. That's it, it's an Atari game, so they're pretty simple. The problem is the gameplay itself, which is frustrating and boring. The pits, man. The pits. You fall into these things constantly, and it's annoying to leave the pits because you need to be fully away from them, or you fall back in if one singular pixel of ET touches it. The AI is poor. They often get stuck between the edge of the screen and a pit. There are a bunch of other oddities in the game, but if you don't have the manual, you'll have no idea what they mean or what they do. While it may not be as awful as it's made out to be, it's still one of the biggest poop stains in gaming history. Okay, so this game was intentionally made to be a big piece of shit. Created by, probably gonna mispronounce this, Kolun Kurosawa. I butchered that, I know. It was meant to mock Nintendo's strict quality standards for licensing a game. Hong Kong 97 is a very strange creation. The story has you play as Bruce Lee's relative, Chin, who is portrayed to be Jackie Chan, to kill 1.2 billion red communists and destroy the ultimate weapon called Deng Xiaoping, which is just a disembodied head of Deng Xiaoping. The game is a very basic shoot 'em up where you kill hordes of commies rushing down the screen with really ugly visuals and Coca-Cola. One hit and you die, and the death screen shows a real life picture of an actual corpse, even with the date the picture was taken. The game resets itself, and you need to go through the intro every single time you die. This game did what it was set out to do: be intentionally terrible. Good job. Alright, hear me out. Let's take a basketball player and put him into a fighting game. What do you guys think? What do you mean I'm fired? Shaq Fu might actually be the worst fighting game I've played. At least with Balls 3D, I was able to move. For some reason, pushing left and right doesn't even move Shaq, and pulling off basic moves is really hard for some reason. All the while, the AI has no issue and is constantly pounding in your ass when you're trying to figure out how the controls work. The only way to get through each battle is just to spam a singular move, because good luck trying to competently play this game without snapping your controller in half. The graphics are the only positive to this game. They actually look pretty good. But did you know there was a website dedicated to this game to liberate every single copy in existence? It's a great website, honestly. Also, for some reason, there's a sequel to this game that was released like 2 decades later. It wasn't received very well, but at least people said it was an improvement over this game. So, that's a positive, I guess. Dark Castle on the computer is an alright game. Dark Castle on the Genesis is fucking awful. The controls are so bad that walking around is annoying because Duncan here, our main protagonist, trips and gets dizzy all the fucking time, even after a tremendous 2-foot drop. The only way to attack is to rotate your arm around and throw rocks. Enemies are hard to hit because the projectile is small, and turning your arm on a D-pad is slow as shit in comparison to using an actual mouse. Too bad there's no mouse for the Genesis. This game is also ported to the CDI, where it's exponentially worse. But you know what though? The whole game can be skipped. See, you need to find objects in certain rooms to fight the Black Knight, the final boss and such, you know. But you don't need them, because you can go straight to the boss and pull a few levers and win, beating the game in no time. The music is annoying after a while, and the sound effects are obnoxious, especially those little creatures that go "na-na-na-na-na-na." Liberate every copy of this game too, along with Shaq Fu. Pokemon Pet Simulators. Why haven't we gotten a full-scaled one at all from Game Freak? I don't know, that seems like easy money right there. Back on the N64, Hey You Pikachu was the first sort of Pokemon Pet Simulator. Basically, you make friends with a wild Pikachu and you can hang out with it and play a bunch of games with it. Sounds okay, sure, but the game requires you to use the N64's VRU, which is a microphone and only one other game on the console used. The mic itself isn't the most responsive thing in the world, but it's also not completely terrible too. There's only so much you can say to Pikachu, only around like 250 phrases. Compared to Sega's Seaman game, which is sort of similar, it's pretty lacking. The minigames themselves are really boring to play, and they're only tough to play because Pikachu never wants to listen to you. I think if this game was released nowadays, it would be a really fun experience with the new improvements to technology and all that. It was ambitious, sure, but it sucks. I have a review of this game on my channel too. Gotta plug my epic reviews whenever possible, you know? From the same team behind Big Rigs Over the Road Racing, we have a ripoff of Crazy Taxi, Taxi Racer. And yes, this just plays like a poor man's version of Crazy Taxi. The controls are awful and the damn taxi moves way too fast, so steering is almost impossible. The collision on objects is really bad, especially buildings where if you crash into them, you can get stuck and clip through them. The graphics are really poor and most of the textures are just photos plastered onto buildings in the ground. At least this game is more complete than Big Rigs, but somehow it's worse than Big Rigs, because at least Big Rigs was funny to play. This game is just a nightmare to play. Action 52 is one of the worst compilations of random video games ever conceived. For starters, this game is retailed at $200 in 1991, which by today's standards is around $400. But why the high price though? Well, the justification was that this came packaged with 52 original games, so around $4 per game. The only problem was a majority of these games were just shitty knockoffs of much better NES games. A lot of the games had no instructions and were insanely broken with bad controls. Games like Star Evil would kill you instantly if you didn't hold right when the game started. Alfred in the Fedek and Jigsaw don't launch on the original cartridge and just crash. A lot of the games are generic space shooters. Most of the platforming games have really odd jumping controls where you tap the jump button and move forward because holding the button locks you vertically. Ooze was originally going to have a contest held to win, I think, $100,000 to whoever beat the game, but the game crashes after level 2. A lot of the games crash after reaching a certain point, so listing them all would take forever. The developers even tried to have their own franchise with the Cheetah Man game. It sucks monkey butts like all the fucking rest of the games on the cartridge. This game was also released on the Sega Genesis. Most of the games are different, but still aren't very good, but they're a lot more functional than anything on this clear sack of shit. But you know what? I've heard that the developers of this game actually want to re-release this game and fix all the problems that the game has. I'm not sure if that project is still going on, but hopefully they can actually make this game good. Randy. How is it that games that were in development hell end up in your hands? Aliens Colonial Marines has had a rough development cycle, much like Duke Nukem Forever, but I honestly think that this game is way worse. The gameplay is, again, your standard modern FPS, but I guess they forgot about what enemies are present in the game. Xenomorphs, very fast enemies, and your character is slow as shit and can't shoot while running. The Xenomorph AI is really bad and often gets stuck on terrain. They also have a problem present in Gods and Generals, where all of them ignore your teammates and just attack you instead. Oh yeah, the teammates, they don't do shit. At least in Daikatana, your partners could kill enemies. I haven't seen any of my crews kill a singular alien or soldier. O'Neil carries around that big ass smart gun the whole fucking game and is unable to hit jack shit with it. Trying to hit enemies is also frustrating because even though your crosshair is on the enemy, nothing will happen if you shoot them. It was found out that bullets come out of the player model rather than the gun. What? The level design is very linear and repetitive. Pretty much all the levels you just shoot behind boxes at the same few enemies. I think you actually fight more human enemies than you do aliens in this game. The game's graphics and cutscenes are really poor. None of the characters are memorable or likable, except O'Neil, but he's only memorable because he's in the way most of the time. And they are so poorly animated in each cutscene. They barely emote at all. It's like their faces are frozen in time. The final boss is a complete joke too. Just press 2 switches at the right time to fling the alien queen off the ship. And that's it. I heard the multiplayer mode was decent, but I never tried it. and I gotta give credit to Templar GFX who spent a ton of time trying to fix this abomination. But despite his efforts, the game still has major problems up the ass. But at least he cares enough to fix it. Unlike you, Randy, at least Alien Isolation, which was the follow-up game, was amazing. And luckily, Randy didn't touch that one. So I got a comment in the last part giving me a list of games that I could potentially use for this list. I appreciate that because I'm having a hard time remembering some really bad ones. One of them caught my eye because I did play it somewhat recently. Mythmaker's Supercart GP is the one that stuck out and reeks of lazy cash grab. Data Design is back at it with their low-effort shovelware, this time in the form of a really shitty racer. How about we go down the checklist of the DDI crap? Lazy graphics? Check. Reusing assets? Check. Obnoxious music? Check. Badly implemented motion controls that barely work? Check-a-rooney. You know, at first I didn't mind the motion controls for steering because the tracks seemed to be built around them, but then I played the more involved tracks. The controls are really bad because you just can't make most turns. You barely turn at all. The tracks themselves are pretty basic, but not awful. What is awful is that they reuse the same few tracks with slight differences like mirroring them or changing the weather. The AI is ridiculous too. They all follow each other in a straight line like ants. The only thing I liked in this game was the item system. If you're holding onto an item and grab another box, it'll upgrade that weapon. It kind of reminds me of Mod Nation Racers. A much better racing game that I think everybody should play if they have a PlayStation 3. That game kicks ass. Oh geez. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties has to be one of the laziest video games ever made. The game follows Jane and John, who are being pestered by their parents to pop their cherries and make some babies. You have choices on how you want the story to progress, and the outcome is always something ridiculous. It probably could have worked as a cheesy FMV game, but the whole game is being portrayed in a bunch of still images of the characters. PowerPoint presentations have more motion than this game. Sometimes the photos will have really strange filters or just random as fuck characters show up to ruin the already not entertaining story. The amount of unfunny puns and sex jokes is almost as annoying as box office bust. This game was made for the 3DO, which was totally capable of having full motion video. The intro movie is a video, so how come the rest of the game isn't one too? I guess we'll never know.
Take your damn clothes off!
I wanted to like Dead Rising 4, but man, I really couldn't get into it. Dead Rising isn't my favorite series of games, but I still really enjoyed playing through them. The fourth game is the latest and probably the last in the series. This game was the final nail in the coffin for this franchise. But why? Well, let's start with the story. It's nothing groundbreaking. Basically, another zombie virus broke out, and Frank West is back with his student Vic to try and stop it and find the cause of all of it. All of the characters in this game are either jerks, annoying, or boring. Frank is the worst offender here because they completely changed his character. He's not even Frank West anymore. They turned him into a middle-aged man telling really unfunny jokes and acting like a complete dick to everybody. It's really obnoxious and, worst of all, not entertaining. The gameplay was also completely stripped down. Sure, you have the basics of a large map and a bunch of zombies to mow down, but that's it. With the exception of the mall, most of the environment is just not that fun to explore. You have an incentive, but also no incentive to explore. See, the other Dead Rising games were timed. Certain events had certain intervals. If you failed to show up for them, they would disappear, or in the case of main quests, your game was over. The high stakes of the previous games are gone, so you can freely explore, which is nice, but the overworld is so bland. The only interesting thing to find are blueprints for combo weapons, which are really lacking in this game. Especially because the zombies are more lifeless than in previous games, for a lack of better words. It's not satisfying to mow down hundreds of zombies in this game. Dead Rising 3 did it right, I feel. The only side missions you can get are mainly Maniac missions, which replace the psychopaths from previous games. Maniac fights are just lazy. It's essentially just a buffed up survivor with more health. They have no personality or character to them at all. You can rarely find other overworld missions. I must have explored this whole place, and I only found like 4 missions you could do. They're no fun either. The ending really sucks too. Only one possible ending compared to the other games which had multiple endings. The post-game story was $10 DLC. Fuck off, really? I will say they did improve the game with updates, but it still isn't enough to save this game. The Capcom Heroes mode is the only part I actually enjoyed in this game. Oh, and they also removed 2-player co-op for the campaign, which I don't know why they did that. That was probably like one of the most fun parts of the previous 2 games, so this game really has nothing going for it. This is why Nintendo has a close grasp on their IPs. If they didn't, they would end up with the Zelda CDI games. I'm counting all 3 of them because they all equally suck. Wand of Gamelon and the Faces of Evil are almost identical games, so let's start with those 2 first. First off, the cutscenes. They're goofy and horrible, but great for YouTube poops in the early days of the site. Second, the controls are awful. It's a side-scroller where you have to press up to jump. For a platforming game where precision is key, this is not acceptable. You have a button for your sword, and then you have one button for literally everything else. Using items, opening doors, talking to people. There's a third button on the controller. Why can't they just use that for most of this shit? You'll accidentally do things you didn't want to do because it's all mapped to a single button. The gameplay is rough because the enemies are so high in numbers and you don't have post-hit recovery, so you'll die constantly. Picking up rubies, not rupees, is a chore because you need to stab them with your sword to collect them. The only positive to these games are the graphics, not the cutscenes, and the music is pretty catchy. Without rambling on for too long, let's get the third game out of the way. It's a top-down game much like the first Zelda game, but with digitized sprites. Everything you would expect to suck, sucks. The graphics are ugly, the controls are unresponsive, loading to each screen takes forever, the menu is slow, the maps are useless, etc. This is probably the worst one out of the 3 just because it's more jank, and it doesn't have those funny, poorly made cutscenes either. How dare they? So this game was apparently just supposed to be a tech demo to test the creator's basic compiler and sound driver, but for some reason it was released on the Sega Genesis in 2004. Crazy Bus is not a game. I don't even need to tell you why it sucks. Look at it. All you do is pick a really crappy bus and drive it to the right, and honk the horn if you're feeling adventurous. All I really need to do is play the title music to prevent you from actually playing this game. How in the world did this get turned into a game for the Sega Genesis? A console, at that point, has been discontinued for about 7 years. I couldn't tell you. Games that are classified as clones get shit on a lot, like the original Saints Row games. But at least those games are good. Rough Trigger The Vanacore Conspiracy is a shitty clone of Ratchet & Clank. I say shitty because it's basically just Ratchet & Clank, but give it to the shitheads that made Ninja Breadman. They didn't make this game, but that's what it feels like. Everything, like the movement and firing weapons, all feels off. It's way too floaty and the impact of the weapons are so light it's like you're beating enemies with pool noodles. The plot of the game is just the same as in Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, with these creatures called piglots being sold as pets but are actually giant monsters in disguise. You even need to collect these things at certain points in certain levels. It's so tedious because you can only pick up one at a time and drop it in the portal, then go back and forth and back and forth. It's very repetitive. The characters all suck. They tried to portray them as being more badass than they are, but they're just lame and gay. Ruff is an absolute moron. Dude literally drinks some green shit he finds on the planet and transforms into a wolf monster. It has no impact on the plot. He can transform now, which is just better than his base form because you can jump better, move faster, and kill things easier. The level design is so boring and dark. They're all just shitty ripoffs of planets from Ratchet & Clank. The motorbike level can suck a fart. The graphics and cutscenes are all poor with really crappy acting to boot. Honestly, what was the point of this game? This game came out in 2006. By this point, there were already 4 Ratchet & Clank games for the PS2. And next year, in 2007, there would have been a Ratchet & Clank game for the PS3. This game is completely pointless and a waste of time. Holy shit. How in the fuck did a game like this get released to the public? Animal Soccer World is not a game. It's just a poorly animated movie put onto a disc. Okay, well there is a game here, but it's just a bunch of shitty minigames. Stuff like matching, jigsaw puzzles, and the worst ones of them all, slide puzzles. The main draw of this game is the movie, and it's truly the worst. The animation, horrible. Voice acting, horrible. Plot, dog shit. Characters, AIDS. Length, longer than it needs to be. I seriously can't sit through this whole thing. The acting is so poor, it's like the voice actors were on meth during the recording. And you know what? This isn't the only game like this. There are a few other games out there that are similar to this one with the same crappy minigames and poorly made movies. If you want to look them up for yourself, just check out Phoenix Games, the developers of this game. You'll find a goldmine of shit. So, I'm pretty sure this game was intentionally made to suck ass, much like Hong Kong 97, but I'm throwing it on here because it's still a sucky game. Stalin vs. Martians is a parody of real-time strategy games. I mean, come on, you play as Joseph Stalin, and you need to stop and kill a bunch of aliens. Even if it's meant to be a parody, they could have tried to make the game fun to play. A lot of the elements of normal RTS games are just not there. The game is very short, it's very glitchy and buggy, enemy placement and AI is pretty bad too. The game still has some positives. It's funny, until it's not anymore. And the soundtrack is actually pretty good. Check this one out if you're curious. Just don't expect a good game. Oh, another shitty fighting game. How many do we have so far? Like 5? Catfight seems like a good time from just the title alone, but once you actually start up the game, the good time implodes on itself. It's a traditional fighting game with digitized actors much like Mortal Kombat. Unlike Mortal Kombat, everything sucks. The controls are very unresponsive and the frame rate is really bad, meaning trying to pull off any move is going to be hard. On top of that, the hit detection barely registers and the AI barely fights back. So basically, you just mash buttons and hopefully you can win. The graphics and the sound are awful, it just sounds like two heavy smokers beating each other up. Trying this game out on modern PCs is impossible. The frame rate isn't capped, so the game will run way too fast, making it even more impossible to play. Or maybe it's better because that means you don't have to play through this game. I know I said no Steam indie trash worth 50 cents, but this one is special. The Slaughtering Grounds is an arena first-person shooter game where you go around 3 different maps shooting endless hordes of zombies. You can unlock new weapons and characters and such. Doesn't sound groundbreaking, but it could be entertaining, right? Well, first off, the zombies have pretty much no AI. They don't move at all until you're right in their face, and even though a majority of them look different, they all act the same way. The weapons aren't lined up properly with the crosshair, and some, like the assault rifles, are way too big and sway across the screen. The shotgun is the only good weapon because it kills everything in one hit compared to every other weapon, which can take multiple hits. Ammo pickups only count for the weapon you're holding, rather than giving you ammo for all guns. Doom figured this out in 1993. The level design is just a bunch of Unity assets placed throughout the map with no thought at all in the design. I literally couldn't walk through a door in one instance. The frame rate takes a dive when too many zombies spawn, and it's almost unbearable to play. If you don't kill the zombies, they will keep spawning. Taking damage has no indication, so you can just randomly wind up dead without realizing it. Honestly, you can complete this game without killing any zombies. They all spawn in fixed locations, so if you find a spot where they don't spawn near you, you can just sit there and run the timer down. You have infinite lives, so there's no challenge at all in this game. The music is just one song that plays on loop, and it's very annoying. Dude, honestly, I made a better zombie map in Little Big Planet 2 when I was 14. So another crappy Steam Greenlight game. What else is new? Well, the reason it's here is because of the developers. Much like Gary's Incident, Digital Homicide tried to silence critics from talking about how shit their game is and probably hired people to give their games good reviews. But unlike the Gary's Incident developers, Digital Homicide actually tried to sue certain Steam users and even YouTuber Jim Sterling for $15 million. Of course, they didn't get shit, and Valve responded by kicking Digital Homicide off of Steam for good. This game, they tried to sue someone for $15 million for saying that this game was bad. Jeez, I wonder, what would happen if they actually made a good game and someone called it trash? I don't know. Once stated to be a Zelda ripoff, but actually released before Zelda 1, it's everyone's favorite shit NES game, Hydlide. Hydlide is an RPG that has aged like milk over the years. Give it a break for at least a little bit, it was one of the first action RPGs to hit Japan, and it's pretty primitive nowadays. Just because it's old though, doesn't mean it's any good. The gameplay is really bad. You need to hold down the A button in order to kill enemies by walking into them, which is very awkward to do. Changing from one screen to the next is so jittery and awful looking. You're forced to grind in this game because enemies will wreck your shit if you're underleveled. The game is directionless and you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing or what each item does. The save system only works for when you have the game on, so you're stuck using long passwords to load your game. The music is so annoying and is a complete ripoff of the Raiders of the Lost Ark theme. But the best part about this game has to be the protagonist's name. What's this brave knight's name? Jim. Jim the Knight. What a cool dude. This game just pisses me off to no end. Fester's Quest, from an outside perspective, doesn't seem like the worst thing ever. Sure, you got that classic NES trash of being way too hard and a severe lack of hit points, but if that was just it wouldn't bother me that much. Nah, dude. Everything else around this game is what makes it terrible. Let's start with Uncle Fester himself. He's slow as dirt and can only move in 4 directions. This game was made by Sunsoft, who also made Blaster Master, and in that game, the character can move diagonally. I really wish it was in this game because avoiding enemies would be way easier with it. Your weapon can be upgraded up to level 8, and you want to do this immediately. Not because it's the strongest, but you just have to because the other upgrades are awful. Upgrades 3 to 7 have such weird wavy patterns that trying to hit things with them is impossible. It also doesn't help that your bullets stop when they hit a wall, so narrow areas like the sewer, you're pretty much fucked. So like Highlight, you need to grind on enemies to get power-ups, which takes an absurd amount of time. You want to avoid the gun downgrades as best as you can because finding more upgrades takes way longer than finding 50 downgrades. Also, when you die, you start back from the beginning of the game. Your progress is saved, sure, but walking back sucks ass. Add on the accidental downgrade pickups and slow speed, and it just isn't a fun time. The only positive to this game is the kick-ass music, but it's not enough to save this game from being shit. If you think Bubsy is annoying, then you clearly never met its obnoxious cousin, Awesome Possum. A Genesis exclusive, Awesome Possum is a side-scrolling mascot platformer, and his gimmick is that he's an environmentally friendly possum who beats up things that try to disrespect it. If that doesn't sound like a blast, then I don't know what would. The game itself is just bad. Awesome Possum himself is just annoying and won't shut up. He talks more than Bubsy and is less endearing to boot. The level design is ugly and not well done. The enemies take a while to kill and only move back and forth, really. The game is really choppy and has constant slowdown. The sound design is more obnoxious than Possum himself. Everything about shitty mascot platformers in the 90s is all inside of this game. Oh yeah, the full title of this game is Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt. To give the game some credit, Possum does kick his butt at the end of the game. So, you know, that's pretty neat, I guess. Wow, I actually forgot about this game. Afro Samurai 2 was delisted so quick that it barely had enough time to sit down. You don't even play as Afro in this game, rather you play as Kuma. This game still feels like it was released in a beta state. The controls are bad, many glitches and other technical oddities. The sound effects are grating, the frame rate is poor, the AI sucks, the camera is very shaky, the combat is boring, the graphics are ugly, you get the picture. Basically, everything this game tries to do just falls flat on its face again and again. At least the developers realized that this game sucked so hard they allowed people to get refunds and completely delisted the game. The Xbox One version didn't even come out. That's how bad it was. At least the soundtrack is good. You can thank the RZA for that one. You know, I recently bought a Kinect for $20, and it's kind of neat and it sort of works. But let's be honest, most games made for this thing didn't work properly. Fighters Uncaged was one of the earliest games released for the Kinect, and everything negative that can be said about the Kinect applies to this game. No matter what move you try to pull off, it either doesn't work or something completely different will happen. Like sometimes doing a punch will cause the characters to do a kick. For the best results, just flail around like a dumbass and hopefully you knock down your opponent. There's no multiplayer and only one mode to play. The tutorial doesn't even help out much with the rest of the game. The graphics and voice acting are all pretty poor for 2010 standards, and you're better off just playing Wii Sports Boxing instead, which released 4 years prior. So last part I talked about Action 52, but did you know there was a sequel to the Cheetah Man game on the cartridge? Yes, Cheetah Man 2 was going to be that sequel and probably be priced normally instead of $200. I say was because this game technically wasn't released. They were found in a warehouse and have become a big collector's item. Other than that, the game itself is as dysfunctional as the entire library of Action 52 games. The mechanics of each stage isn't even similar to each other. Sometimes you have an infinite jump and sometimes you don't. Enemies spawn out the side of the screen and deal damage faster than you can react to it. The cheetah with the crossbow is absolute garbage. You can't hit shit with it. The glitches and graphical hiccups are constant and annoying. It's so bad, in fact, that the game will lock up at the end of level 3, and you can't progress no matter what. What a quality game. I know it's another cheap indie game, but how could I not put the War of the End of the Days on this list? This game was part of my early reviews on this channel, and it's a special kind of awful. I mean, look at this game. It looks more unfinished than Bubsy 3D. Everything is just off in this game. The shooting only works when you're in a specific range of an enemy. The enemies themselves lack in variety and sometimes hit you with pinpoint accuracy or miss entirely. The level design is really bad, buildings and other random objects are just placed about with no thought, and the worst part of this game, the sound. The music for the first level is annoying as hell, but stuck in my brain for all eternity. The sound effects for shooting enemies is like 5 times louder than the original audio. Level 3 has a siren blaring through the entire stage. It's just a mess. It's bad, but it's a special kind of bad to me. Coming out the same year as Doom, but using the engine for Wolfenstein 3D, we have Isle of the Dead. Yeah, so why even play this game when a much better, more advanced FPS came around at the same time? I don't know. This game is just a knockoff of Wolfenstein. The fucking box art has that as a quote. I'm not kidding. There's very little, if any, instructions on what the hell you're supposed to be doing, so you're just walking around like a moron until you find literally anything. There's a lot of other cryptic things like putting oil on a rifle before using it or it'll blow up in your face and you'll die. Speaking of dying, the game is really hard. Enemies respawn after leaving each area and they do a ton of damage. Not to mention the kill you in one-hit events. My favorite. You're better off playing Super Noah's Ark 3D, in all honesty. Man, it took this long to put an LJN game on the list. I'm surprised. Friday the 13th on the NES was actually developed by Atlas and just published by LJN. But, you know, that rainbow logo means you're in for some jank gameplay. This game is both frustrating and confusing. Navigation is a pain because there's no clear indication on which way you're going. You have a map, but it's not at all helpful and only adds to the confusion. See, in this game you need to protect children in cabins before they get killed by Jason. Which, if you know anything about the movies, Jason doesn't kill kids. He's also not afraid of water, but I digress. But Jason himself is an overpowered fucker and can kill you in a few hits. He'll spawn out of nowhere lightning quick and deal damage faster than you can blink. Fighting enemies is a chore because the default weapon is worthless unless you crouch. You can only find new weapons by jumping around in the air or doing some convoluted puzzle. It's just a mess. I would say just play the newer-ish one for a good Friday the 13th experience, but even that game has a ton of problems that'll never be fixed. What a shame. Bubsy is back again on the list, but this time with his Atari Jaguar game, Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. Now the two Bubsy games on the SNES are pretty bad, but they look like Super Mario World when you compare it to this game. They basically just took the first Bubsy game and made it exponentially worse. You die in one hit, you move way too fast, the enemy placement is bad and just pop out of the side of the screen, and the lousy hit detection doesn't even help in this case. The level design is bad, even worse than Bubsy 1. Like, the speed that Bubsy moves does not work with this kind of level design. The levels themselves are also way too long, over 10 minutes in some cases. Since you die in one hit, good luck trying to beat any of them. The graphics are poor and the sound effects are annoying. Damn it, Bubsy, why do you have to suck so much ass in every single game that you're in? Ugh, Batman Forever on the SNES. Yuck. This game is created with the Mortal Kombat engine, even though it's not a fighting game. Rather, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up. The controls are just so fucking bad. In order to progress through the game, you have to do such weird button combos that you would never think to do, like using your grappling hook to reach higher platforms. You need to press select and up in a specific way or you just end up jumping. And getting down, you need to press down and R in a specific way. Why? Combat isn't much better. Even though it uses the Mortal Kombat engine, you can't even deal a string of combos with basic attacks. It just doesn't work and they have a ton of health. It's just tedious and unfun to play. Oh, and no continues. So if you die, you need to play the entire game all over again. Fuck off, Batman Forever, forever. Okay, so I tried to avoid putting sports games that come out every year on this list because they're easy targets and I just don't play sports games. But WWE 2K20 can't be ignored. How did this game get released in the state that it did? This game was completely unstable at launch, with wrestlers glitching all over the place, textures and physics just becoming non-existent, and the whole experience was just a travesty. Luckily it was patched, but a lot of problems still exist. The load times are very long, longer than in previous games. There's still a bunch of weird lighting issues with certain clothes and entrances. The hair is all fucked up and looks worse than Aquaman's GameCube hair. The presentation is also a lot worse. John Cena in this game looks like garbage compared to his 2K15 model. The online mode didn't even work because of the loading issue and bugs. The single player is complete garbage as well. The writing is so poor and cringy and makes Dead Rising 4's script look like Shakespeare. I swear they spent like a week writing this game. Oh, and the game crashes all the damn time, even more than previous games. I finished a 1v1 match and the game crashed. I was in the middle of making a character, crashes. Watching a cutscene, crashes. Watching the intro credits, crashes. To think after 3 months, 2K said fuck it to this game and supported 2K19 instead. At least they learned from their mistakes, and 2K21 was a serious improvement. I mean, you can't get much worse than this at least. Alright, I know this one seems like an odd pick, but this game was such a bummer to me as a child. I mean, I don't know what I expected from a game called Beach Party Cook-Off, but I expected something on the lines of Cooking Mama or something similar. So yeah, the SpongeBob game is all about cooking meals, and it's so boring. I don't know how Nintendo kept cooking fun, and this game couldn't. You know, looking back at this game, it doesn't look like complete trash, and it's probably an okay game. But my younger self can't fuck off, so I'm sticking this on the list just because of that. I had Atlantis Square Pantis on the DS, and that game kicked ass, so I guess I was expecting that as a kid. I don't know why I just put this on the list. It's kind of just like a filler, but I remember this game just bothering me as a kid. It's on the list. Just get it away from me. I'm done. Man, Sonic has a lot of games that just suck, doesn't he? I mean, I don't even put these games on here on purpose. It's just I don't like any of these games. But Sonic R, I kinda like. But even I have to admit that this game is very bad. It's a racing game, but there are only 5 tracks to choose from. All 5 of them have such weird design to them that you'll accidentally end up going backwards on certain tracks the first time through. I think the reason for the odd track design was for the collectibles you can find on each level, which can unlock more characters. The controls suck and sometimes worse depending on the character. Literally, the infamous Tails doll is probably the worst character to play because of this. Super Sonic is incredibly overpowered and will mop the floor in any race. The music is strange for a Sonic game at this time, but it's kind of catchy in a cheesy way. The graphics are okay, but the draw distance on the Sega Saturn version is pretty awful. If you want to try this game out for yourself, play either the GameCube version or the PC version. But be warned though, the controls might cause you to give up. To end off part 3, the Virtual Boy. Just the whole console. This will be the only time I'll put an entire console on the list, just a heads up. So the Virtual Boy was released in 1995, just before the N64 was released for almost $200. And this console only lasted less than a year. I think it was only 7 months. But why? Well, taking a look at the console itself, you can probably see why. It was advertised to be portable, but trying to comfortably play this thing was pretty much impossible. It's just a pair of goggles on a stand, and there's no head strap. The graphics on all the games were only in red and black. The box even claimed that playing for long periods of time could give you headaches or seizures. Yeah, that's good to know. Well, how about the games themselves? Even though this console is called the Virtual Boy, there were only like 2 games that felt like you were in the game, hence the virtual reality aspect of Virtual Boy. But a lot of the games showed off 3D aspects rather than virtual reality. The Virtual Boy does have some good games like Wario Land, Telro Boxer, and Mario Clash, but pretty much all these games you could play on a home console or on a Game Boy and not get a splitting headache. There were only 22 games released on this thing, 14 in North America only. None of these games have been re-released by Nintendo, so the only way you can experience them would be through emulation or buying the console yourself. It's expensive though, so it may not be in your best interest unless you're a collector of really shitty game consoles. But hey, to each their own.
You know, this game has a really cool concept. The Order 1886 takes place in an alternate London where werewolves are rampant and King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table fight back against them. It sounds cool, but instead you get a generic third-person cover-based shooter. Most of the game you fight normal humans and you only fight like a handful of werewolves throughout the game. The weapons are all pretty generic. There are some cool ones, but you only use them for like 5 minutes and maybe only once or twice. Now I want to say half of this game consists of actual gameplay, while the other half is just cutscenes and long walking scenes with stupid-ass letterboxing. Yeah, it's one of those games that try to be more of a movie than a game. I don't think I've seen any game do this idea well at all, except maybe Metal Gear Solid. The story has several plot holes, most plot lines they bring up never conclude, the characters are all really stupid. It's honestly not that interesting. This game was supposed to launch a whole series, but that never happened due to the failure of this game. It's Drake of the 99 Dragons all over again. So when you bought the Wii, you got Wii Sports. When you bought the Wii U, if you bought the Wii U, you got Nintendo Land. Both are just tech demos to show off the hardware, but honestly, they're probably some of the best games for their respected consoles. When the Switch got released, it didn't come with a pack-in game to test out its features. Nah, instead, you need to spend an extra $50 for its tech demo, 1-2 Switch. 1-2 Switch mainly shows off what the Joy-Cons are capable of doing, except constant joystick drifting, but I digress. The whole package is just a bunch of minigames that honestly aren't very fun or worth replaying like Wii Bowling. You also need to play this game with another person because every game requires 2 players or just one person fumbling with both Joy-Cons. So if you're alone, tough shit, you wasted $50. Even if it was a pack-in title, this game is still just bad and you'll play it for like 10 minutes before shutting it off and playing an actual good game like Mario Odyssey. Oh yes, a mobile game. Dungeon Keeper 2014. I only need to say 2 things about this to tell you why it sucks. EA and microtransactions. Actually, if I just said EA, that probably would have sufficed too. Anyways, everything you do in this game takes an obscene amount of time to do. Like mining a block would take a whole day to do when in the original game it took like 30 seconds. EA wants you to spend your hard-earned money on a game that you're meant to just turn on once in a while when you're bored or when you're taking a shit. You literally need to spend money just to see most of this game. Why even make it free to play then? You know what, even if it costed money, EA would still have crammed this stupid dog shit into their game. This game killed the Dungeon Keeper franchise and is just a big middle finger to anyone who loved the original game. Thanks EA for being scumbags yet again. Whoa. Is that Doom footage I see? Well, yes, it is. Doom, in fact, is a fantastic video game, but a majority of its early ports are pretty shitty. For this entry, I gotta go with the 3DO port of Doom. The development of this port was pretty rough because of the no designated staff to design this port, and the publisher, Art Data, being very big-headed about the whole thing just made it worse. I gotta give credit to Rebecca Heinemann for trying her best with this port. She literally had 10 weeks to finish it. So first off, the screen size is incredibly small, and the resolution is terrible because of it. You can make it a bit bigger, but that comes at the cost of the frame rate being way worse than it originally was, sometimes dropping down into the single digits. It runs worse than the Super Nintendo version. This version also had some false advertisement for features that were never included, like new levels and FMV cutscenes. Those would have been sick. The AI was also butchered because most enemies don't even attack back, or take a very long time to attack back. The controls suck ass, and the auto-aim in the original game is way less precise, making it annoyingly hard to hit enemies now. If I gotta say one positive thing about this port, the soundtrack is absolutely fantastic, and probably the best sounding Doom port music I've ever heard. I think if the publisher gave more of a shit about this game, this probably could have been one of the best ports of Doom we've seen. But, oh well. More NES trash. Yo Noid I think could have been an okay side-scroller, but the main problem with the game is that it's very unforgiving. You die in one hit and there are no checkpoints during levels. You have limited continues and getting extra lives is almost impossible. The level design isn't very interesting and can be a bit frustrating at times with enemies flying out of the side of the screen. There's also these mini-games in between levels where you need to select a higher card than the opponent. They are completely pointless and are just a waste of time. In fact, there's a good chance you'll lose these minigames if you don't collect enough stuff in the main levels. What a waste. Aw yeah, baby, it's Knack! And it's bad. Yeah, the funny donkey meme game Knack is very bad. Released at launch of the PS4, Knack is nothing more than a glorified tech demo meant to be taken more seriously than it needed to be. The gameplay is a very basic beat-em-up where you essentially just press one button to kill everything and then maybe solve a very easy puzzle. Knack's main gimmick is that he can absorb pieces into his body, making him bigger and stronger to attacks. Theoretically. No matter how big you are, Knack still dies in like 2 or 3 hits, so the whole size difference is entirely pointless. Power-ups are more of a hindrance than helpful. The plot and the characters are stupid, and the level design is so bog-standard, it's almost painful. Knack, while you are a humorous joke for a while, you can't escape being terrible forever. At least Knack 2 I would consider an actual video game with actual mechanics that function. Another shooter based around the Bible. Super 3D Noah's Ark, or Super Noah's Ark 3D, is an FPS where you play as the titular Noah, running around on the Ark shooting various animals with a slingshot. This game was actually going to be based on Hellraiser, until it later devolved into this. This game is essentially just a reskin of Wolfenstein 3D, but with Noah. The idea itself is what adds it to this list. Also, the difficulty in this game can really spike up in later episodes for no real reason. The SNES version is horribly pixelated with pretty crappy controls. The cartridge was also unlicensed, so you had to stick an actual licensed SNES game on top of it to get the game running properly. The PC version is the better of the two, but the aforementioned difficulty is still there, along with weapon sprites taking up way too much of the screen if your resolution is too low. The kings of looter shooters. Gearbox. Ugh. They give us a looter hack and slash. When you first look at Godfall, your initial thought would be, wow, the graphics are pretty nice. And when you first start playing, the game runs really smooth, and the combat is pretty fun. For like an hour. After that point, the game gets very repetitive. A majority of the loot you can obtain is usually worse than what you already have. The story itself is very boring, and the characters either have no development or are just completely forgettable. Level design gets copy and pasted throughout, the amount of ranged enemy spam is annoying, and there are bugs that make bosses immune to damage. Great. Godfall is also one of those games as a service games, where a lot of the game will be added at a later time, but it's a terrible idea for any game, especially if that game at retail was $70. Also, for some reason, this game has DRM, meaning you can't play offline, even if you're only playing single player. Why do so many games have this as a feature? It's stupid. Get rid of it. Much like E.T., Pac-Man on the Atari is also an infamous game that caused a video game crash in the 80s. So what's wrong with this version of Pac-Man? Well, first off, this port was developed from an unfinished prototype, and it was only given 5 weeks of development time, rather than the 3 to 4 months a normal Atari game should have. The sound effects for eating pellets is this annoying buzz, which gets irritating immediately. The graphics are pretty ugly, even for Atari. I don't know why puke brown and dark blue are the colors they chose, but it looks gross. There are supposed to be 4 ghosts in Pac-Man, but there are only 2 that constantly flicker. The power pellets only last for like 3 seconds before wearing off. No matter how far you progress through the game, the maze layout is exactly the same, and the AI changes from being dumb to super dumb. It's a bad port of Pac-Man. Not much else to say. Dude, come on. This is the 4th Sonic game on the list. Why do a majority of Sonic games just suck ass? Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric is one Sonic game everyone can agree has no redeeming qualities at all. I think this game came out right as the Sonic Boom cartoon first aired, and while people think that show is good, the tie-in game is absolute garbage. Let's start with presentation. The graphics are very bad. The Wii U is capable of having beautiful looking games like Pikmin 3. Sonic Boom just looks like a PS2 game. The frame rate can also dip into like 15 FPS or worse when there's just a little too much going on. The gameplay is painfully boring and easy. Combat usually consists of mashing one button and occasionally using the enter beam. The platforming is basic and the puzzles are so easy that a baby could solve it. The story is generic, with a generic bad guy named Lyric who wants to destroy the world just because, and the characters are annoying. The main four you play as also never shut the fuck up during gameplay and say the dumbest, most obvious shit, and you can't turn it off. This game even had a game-breaking bug with Knuckles where you could pretty much skip the entire game with a jump glitch. They did patch it out along with some other issues, but it wasn't enough to make the game worth playing. Let's finish this trifecta of really crappy superhero games for the N64 with Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker. Compared to Superman and Power Rangers, it's probably the best of the three, but it still sucks super ass. The controls are terrible. The music is a 10-second loop that never stops, the level design is poor, the AI is poor and seemingly only comes in groups of 2, the alternate suits you can obtain, like the Nimble suit, you'll rarely use because the extra moves it gives, like gliding, you'll almost never use. The combat is a joke because you'll take really cheap shots from enemies unless you're using the defense suit, which makes the combat a complete joke. Also, if you play this game on an emulator, the game runs way faster than it should because the frame rate isn't capped. Not a fault of the game itself, but just a warning if, for whatever reason, you want to torture yourself with this weak movie tie-in. Oh good, Titus returns with another crappy tie-in game. Did anyone ever play Blues Brothers 2000? So this game is a tie-in with the movie of the same name, which released 2 years prior, after it bombed in the box office. The game itself is really strange in comparison, with this overly cartoony art style and a plot that isn't at all similar to the movie. There are only 4 levels in the game, very large and boring levels where you jump around collecting money, music notes, instruments for your band members, etc. The controls have a very slight delay to them, making combat and jumping around very annoying. The levels aren't that interesting to play. You got a prison, Chicago, a graveyard, and a bayou. The Chicago level copy and paste the same exact areas like 3 times. The bayou level has a really hard chase sequence where it's easy to get killed. The camera sucks, the music is licensed but only uses like 20 seconds of each track, and the graphics are putrid. At least give some credit to Titus, it's more of a game than Superman was. Oh boy, a remaster that's way worse than the original. Warcraft 3 Reforged was absolutely trashed when it was released. First off, the plethora of bugs on launch were obnoxious, like server connection issues, bad frame rates, graphical bugs, and crashes. The graphics, besides the character models, are way worse in comparison to the original. The false promise of having really cool looking cutscenes were completely removed for really stupid reasons. Much like Overwatch 2, this game replaces the original, but removes all of your save data from Frozen Throne and Reign of Chaos, because guess what? Those mods don't work with this version. This whole experience was just a travesty, and was the lowest rated game on Metacritic for a while, until Diablo Immortal stole that position. What a travesty Blizzard has become. As a wise man once said, fuck you, fuck this, and fuck tennis. Mario Tennis Ultra Smash is another title for the Mario Tennis series, released on the Wii U, and well, it's tennis. It looks great and plays pretty well too, but that's it. The whole game is just simple tennis, with no impactful gimmicks thrown in. Well, you have one, which is the Mega Mushroom. You grow big and your shots are a lot stronger. But that's it. It gets old and repetitive very fast. There's essentially no single-player mode like in the previous titles. Rather, it's a tournament mode where you play against random characters in the game and try to beat them. There's only a single court with very minimal customization to try and make it more unique. The multiplayer doesn't make the game any more fun, and much like 1-2 Switch, it feels more like a tech demo rather than a game released for $50. I should also add that this game was rushed to meet the 2015 Christmas deadline. Were people really biting at Nintendo's feet to get a tennis game for the holiday? Really goes against what Miyamoto said. A rushed game is forever bad. Alright, I promise that this is the last Sonic game on the list. I'm ending it with a real bad one, Sonic Freeriders. The third installment in the Sonic Riders series, and probably the final game in said series because this game was such an utter failure that it murdered the series. Man, a lot of series murdering games on this list. What's the main issue if you're oh so unaware? The controls. It's a Kinect game, so you gotta use your body to move, except that it does not work at all. Standing like you're riding a surfboard and leaning forward and backwards has never worked in literally any Kinect game I've played. It just doesn't work. It either doesn't read it or it overreads it and you go crashing into a wall. Your back is going to be in serious pain after just a single race. That's how bad it is. Besides that, there's a severe lack of content, the menus are annoying to navigate, the frame rate likes to drop constantly, and every single character in this game gained a different personality and became way more obnoxious or boring. This might be the worst Sonic game ever made. At least the other aforementioned games didn't break my spine in half while playing, and I can actually move around properly. This game is not what its title suggests. Legendary has a pretty cool premise by incorporating mythological creatures and Pandora's box being open and unleashing these creatures. But much like the Order 1886, it falls into a generic shooter bin. The levels are way too uninteresting for a game with a cool premise like this. You go to like 2 cities and a castle with very bleak graphics. The weapons aren't very interesting either, just your generic pistols, shotguns, SMGs, etc. Dying sucks because the checkpoints are so far apart from each other that you'll have to replay large chunks of each stage. Puzzles aren't very interesting and usually boil down to turning a valve or shooting something because the main character thinks that's what you should do. There are parts of this game where things are over-explained and then never explained at all, making you feel lost on the ladder. The graphics aren't that great, and the PC version has a literal game-breaking bug, which makes it so you can't reach the final boss. You clip through the elevator that takes you to said boss, and die. Unless you know how to fix it inside the game's .ini files, you're never beating the PC version. The main series Pokemon games have been on decline after Black and White in my opinion, but they haven't been this completely abysmal. Pokemon Sword and Shield just flat out sucks. The amount of false advertising we got even before the game was released was insulting. No national decks, and an abundance of lies saying the game will improve graphically and animation-wise. Yeah, that never happened. On release, this game was completely bare bones in terms of content. Let's start with the story, which is akin to the original Pokemon Red and Blue. Go around the region and collect 8 badges to reach the Elite Four, and eventually the champion. There's also a side plot about this thing called the Darkest Day, which honestly isn't as interesting as it's made out to be, and just there to try have some semblance of an interesting plot. All of the characters you come across are just not that interesting, except for like Piers and Bede, however you say his name. They constantly follow you around and appear in like every cutscene. Hop is a wimp and has no confidence in himself throughout the game. Leon is the generic cool champion guy. Sonia talks about shit you don't care about, and Marnie is just there. And even the main baddie, Rose, isn't very engaging. He doesn't even have grunts working for him. Sure, you have Team Yell, who only simp for Marnie and are a major step down from the previous generation's Team Skull. The gameplay is what you expect from a Pokemon game. The main selling point of this game is the wild area. You can find a plethora of different Pokemon, which can lead to a lot of diverse teams. It's neat, but that's the only thing that this game has going for it. There's also Dynamaxing, which usually happens in major battles. You can Dynamax your Pokemon for 3 rounds, making their attacks super strong. Since you can activate it whenever, it makes most gym fights a joke. All of the towns and routes are completely linear, with almost no backtracking and nothing to explore. No extra paths and caves to find legendaries or hidden areas. Nothing. The pacing is so bad in this game, it's just gym to gym to gym. Only at the very end of the game do we have to deviate from this monotony. There was also 2 DLCs, which costed $30 each. The Isle of Armor is pretty lame. It introduces a new Pokemon and has a cool fight with Master Mustard, but besides that, it really only adds more Pokemon to the decks. The Crown Tundra is much better because it actually gives you the chance to catch legendary Pokemon and has a really cool multiplayer mode called Dynamax Adventures. But really, both of these could have just been in the base game. The amount of stuff it adds isn't that insane that it justifies an extra $60. Last thing to mention before I stretch this out much longer than I should is presentation. The character models look pretty good, but the world looks really bad. It's very muddy with low textures and low draw distance with Pokemon popping in front of you. The only redeeming thing this game has is the soundtrack, which is amazing. By the time I upload this video, Scarlet and Violet might be out already. Hopefully that doesn't suck as much as this game. Keeping this one shorter, The Fifth Element is another crappy movie-based game. Oh, haven't seen this already. Everything you think would suck does in fact suck. The plot barely follows the movie's plot, the draw distance is really bad, the controls suck, the guns never seem to hit anything, you can barely control the camera, the levels are bad, and the AI works on Dragon Ball logic where one enemy fights you at a time while the other guy just stands in the back and waits. It's another crappy movie game. Not much else to say. I don't know why it took me until entry number 94 to put a Simpsons game on the list, but here we are. This has to be the worst one in my humble opinion. Simpsons Wrestling. Even though wrestling is in the title, it plays more like a Power Stone game than a WWE game. The game is just not balanced at all. Ned Flanders, of all characters, is the most overpowered character because he has this insane lightning attack which does a ton of damage. The controls are really bad, so you're left running around like a dumbass and mashing buttons to hopefully pull off something good. The graphics are ugly and the voices of the characters get annoying after just a few minutes. It's kind of sad knowing that Simpsons games are kind of dead nowadays. The last unique one was a mobile game in 2013. They should re-release this game again with real wrestling engine and a ton of new characters. It might actually be pretty good. Somebody out there thought that this needed to be a game. Color a Dinosaur should not be a game. It's essentially one of those color books you find for like $3 at Walmart, put inside of an NES cartridge and probably worth around $50 when it released. There's only 16 images you can draw on with very limited colors and options for patterns. I think you only get like 5 different colors. The game takes a while to fill up certain areas of the drawing if you use the paint bucket. Why was this made? Mario Paint was already out on the SNES. Why go back to the NES and play something way worse? I don't know. Damn, a lot of movie-based games are showing up now. Land of the Dead: Road to Fiddler's Green is a prequel of sorts to George Romero's movie, Land of the Dead. It's not a bad idea, but the game itself is just awful. Running it on newer PCs is possible, but you have to go through a ton of hotfixes just to get the game to run and save properly. It was released on the original Xbox as well, but it only works on the original and the game itself is way too expensive. The gameplay is broken and easy. Shooting is inconsistent because the aiming is a pain, even standing still. The zombie AI is a joke because they just slowly walk at you until you kill them. The graphics are very bad, the animations and voice acting from the main character are awful, and the music isn't very interesting either. I wouldn't bother trying to get this game to work. Oddly enough though, I played this game last year and found somebody actually playing the multiplayer. That's pretty wild, to be honest. Man, Alone in the Dark has been shit for over a decade. It's sad to see the pioneer of survival horror games go through this. The 2008 reboot of Alone in the Dark seemed promising, but it's a major pain in the ass to play. The combat is really bad and it is a complete slog to try and kill one single enemy, especially since the perspective changes depending on what weapon you use. Guns are first person while melee weapons are third person. The game has a very annoying crafting system where if you don't select items in a specific order, it just won't craft. The driving sequences are the absolute worst because of the terrible controls and physics killing you more times than it should. Storing items, while it looks neat, is very limiting, forcing you to throw away very important items. There's also several bugs and glitches causing parts of the game to not load correctly, killing you instantly. The plot is stupid with some of the dumbest yet most hilarious dialogue I've ever heard from a game. I guess to be positive, the use of fire during gameplay is cool and the soundtrack isn't bad, but I really wouldn't bother playing through it just to experience these two things. Even watching the trailer, I knew this game was going to suck absolute crap when it finally released. Contra Rogue Corps is a disgrace to the series, especially the original game on the NES. First problem, your guns overheat if you shoot for too long. Considering most of the game requires constant shooting, this is unnecessary and a big pain in the ass. None of the other games had it, so why does this one? The game shop is pretty much required because the game becomes almost impossible to progress without using it. It doesn't help that the shop is confusing to navigate because they made it way more complicated than it needed to be. The gameplay is very repetitive because they keep reusing the same exact layout for a majority of stages. The camera angles can be a problem, especially during platforming sections where it's hard to judge where you're going to land. The game looks butt ugly and doesn't even crack 30 FPS in most instances. It looks like something you would find on the App Store for like $5 rather than a $40 AAA release. Calling Konami a AAA developer nowadays doesn't sit right with me.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer only bullshit.
A wise fella named Cliffy B said that with his new quote-unquote billion-dollar IP, Lawbreakers. While it isn't inherently a bad game, it's bad in a sense that it was released at such an awful time in an oversaturated first-person shooter market. Games like Overwatch, Call of Duty, Halo, Paladins, and even Titanfall were still big games around this time, so Lawbreakers didn't really stand out. It also didn't help that Destiny 2 would be released just a month after this game, so you know that no one gave a shit about it. It also didn't help that the marketing for this game sucked absolute monkey piss with such fantastic slogans like, "Are you skilled AF?" or "The Dark Souls of FPS games," which honestly doesn't make sense, and good old Cliffy boy being an egotistical douchebag during interviews. Yeah, Cliff, you made Gears of War. So what? It doesn't give you the right to act like a stuck-up prick, discouraging people from buying your new game. Sad thing is that the game is kinda fun. The movement is fluent and shooting feels great. Sadly, however, since this game has no single player to speak of, the game relies heavily on an active player base to keep it alive, as well as constant updates and balance changes. Most of the game modes were just different variations of Capture the Flag, and the game didn't even have Team Deathmatch on launch. The art style, while it's not bad, it's extremely generic, and none of the characters are at all memorable, and say some really dumb shit during gameplay. Can't forget about the loot boxes. I feel bad for people who spent money on these because this game died in less than a year. 3 months after launch, the player base was only around to 10 concurrent players. I'm pretty sure Brink has a more active player base nowadays. Lawbreakers, while it was inherently fun, had no chance of survival, and you can't even buy it on Steam anymore. What a shame. Here we are, number 100. It honestly pains me to put this on the list, but after hundreds of hours playing through it, I can safely say that Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, is not a good game. Now I'm specifically talking about the Scholar Edition here. The original release of Dark Souls 2, while it has its problems I'll address, is not nearly as obnoxious as the quote-unquote definitive version of Dark Souls 2. So let's take a look at what makes Dark Souls 2 just so bad to me personally. I saved this one till the end because this will probably be the longest one out of all of these. Movement and combat. Walking around just doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm blocked moving in 8 directions, and only if I turn the camera while walking it'll feel normal to me. I didn't have this issue in the first Dark Souls, but if you play the first one a lot, it's very noticeable. Combat is much slower than the first game. When you swing a weapon in the first game, you could usually mash the dodge button to recover quickly. Depending on the weapon determines how long it'll take for you to recover. Dark Souls 2 has a very long delay after swinging a weapon, even with really light, fast weapons like daggers, meaning if you get ganged up on, there's a good chance you'll take really cheap damage. The lock-on is completely borked. If you're locked onto an enemy and you roll away from them and press the attack button, their character will aim their weapon towards the enemy after a roll. Dark Souls 2 does not have that, so you'll end up attacking in the opposite direction of the enemy. That's awkward. They really want you to play passively in this game with shields, especially since they removed half of your invincibility frames during rolls. Yeah, this sucks. You're pretty much required to level up the only new attribute in this game, adaptability, which increases your invincibility frames and the speed you heal with Estus. It's a terrible mechanic because it removes any semblance of creativity building a character because you need invincibility frames. Even then, the hitboxes for certain enemies are just awful, like the mimics who can attack you and grab you from behind. A lot of the enemies are just annoying to fight, like really large enemies having almost no cooldown during attacks, and attack just as fast as a normal hollow. Healing is a joke too because the life gems are objectively better than the Estus. You can get an infinite amount pretty early on in the game. They're better in the fact you can move while using them and stack when you use multiple at once. The boss fights are a joke. Before Elden Ring, Dark Souls 2 had the most bosses with an impressive 42. It's quantity over quality with these guys though, because a lot of them just suck ass. A lot of them barely put up a fight and you can easily just spam them down with basic attacks. Covetous Demon is just a big fat worm who can barely fight back and can be easily killed without a sweat. Prowling Magus is just a bunch of basic mobs in a room, and they called it a boss. Some bosses have artificial difficulty to make it seem like they're harder than they actually are. Old Iron King has this stupid fucking hole in his arena which has killed me more times than the king himself. Or the Royal Rat Authority with those stupid toxic rats which are more threatening than the main boss. Only a handful of bosses in this game I would consider to be actually fun. A lot of them are DLC related, like the Ivory King and Fume Knight. I have more problems with the base game, like level design and other crap like that, but I don't want to drag it out for too long, of course. So let's move on with the Scholar of the First Sin, the definitive version of Dark Souls 2. What does it add, you may ask yourself? Well, all of the DLC is packaged in, the lore is expanded a bit more, and you have a new final boss in Aldrich, which is pretty neat. But the main problem with Scholar is the insane amount of enemies they pumped into each area. They really turn up the artificial difficulty in this game with an overabundance of enemies in each area. Places like Iron Keep, you're pretty much forced to kill everything just to get by. I don't know whose idea it was to do this, but this was such a terrible decision that this version is inferior to the original, but that's just me. So this concludes my bottom 100 worst games of all time. I had a lot of fun making this list. Your opinion definitely differs from mine, and some games on this list you might actually enjoy. You know, that's fine, unless it's Superman 64, then I'd have to judge you very harshly on that one, because I don't understand how anyone can like that game. I hope you enjoyed this series of videos. I probably won't be doing a top 100 favorite video games anytime soon, but maybe I'll do something like that, like, I don't know, 5 years from now. So see you soon with whatever video idea I come up with next. I might compile all 4 of these parts into one video, but I gotta see on that one. See you later.